Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello, and welcome to the weekly broadcast of Strategic Speaking for Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and today I am so excited because I have two of my best favorite people here as my guests. We have Jacqueline Wales and in the orange, and Joie Seldon in the blue. I should say they're both redheads, but I could say that the redheads, but they're both redheads. Anyway, two of my favorite people to help us make some sense about bad behavior in the workplace and taming bad behavior in the workplace. I've recently done a podcast with Sharon Weitzman, who talks about helping manage misconduct with remote workers, and then also with Dr. Mitch Cusey about dealing with bad behavior in the workplace. And I thought, I really want to talk to people who are really good at this. So we're going to be talking to both of them, and I'm just going to make sure that I've got the right introduction for each person. Let me start with Joie Seldon, whose mission is to teach easy-to-use techniques to master emotions, build healthy relationships, and handle life's challenges successfully. She draws from her background as an entrepreneur, professional actor, acting teacher, and somatic counselor, and she's developed a keen understanding of human motivation and behavior. Joy's decades of experience, education, and experimentation resulted in the creation of a practical and highly effective training called the Joie Method. Joy, I'm going to have you explain that in a minute, which is a system for harnessing emotions as a tool for success. In person and in her instructor-led online course, Emotions at Work, she has helped thousands of executives and professionals successfully navigate challenging situations and advance their career. Mm-hmm. Now, Jacqueline has, for more than 35 years, explored human behavior and asked tough questions to discover hard truths. Jacqueline believes in the power of fearlessness to create the career and life you want. And Jacqueline, I'm definitely asking you about fear because that's such a big deal with the bad behavior at work. Jacqueline is a motivational speaker, professional coach, author of The Fearless Factor and other books. She's helped countless people become more empowered, confident, and resilient. Her work focuses on leaders who will dig into self-discovery, take accountability for their actions, that's important, and responsibility for their decisions. Her programs include the Transformational Strategies for Success, which is a self-directed online coaching program, which provides a framework for strategy and accountability to grow career and life success. So welcome to both of you. Jacqueline, let me start with you. When we were talking about this, you mentioned the concept of not having safety in the workplace and what that does to people. Can you expand on the word safety?
Yeah, we're really talking about psychological safety here. Mm-hmm. We're talking about being able to express oneself without fear of judgment, without fear of humiliation, without that sense of criticism or not fitting in, that there is an openness and a transparency that is actually honored within the workplace. That doesn't happen too often, frankly.
Yes.
Most people feel constrained by their work environment because they cannot be honest, because they can't show up authentically. And so psychological safety is really speaking to the issue of How can we create a workplace where people truly show up as themselves and not with a mask on that the company or the environment of the company may demand of them? And that is a major issue. There's a book called The Fearless Organization, and it was written by Amy Edmondson, who is an expert on psychological safety. So I would say anyone who's really interested in this topic, check out The Fearless Organization. And Joy probably knows this book quite well too, but I would say that that is really the book on understanding what psychological safety truly means. But bottom line is, the safety piece is, am I safe? Am I safe to express myself? Am I safe and I won't lose my job because I tell somebody that this isn't working for me?
What this makes me think of is what I always say is rule number one for speakers, for presenters, is make it about them. Use strategic empathy to put yourself in their shoes, which means that you as a leader need to be paying attention to your emotions and where you are triggered, because things that we might take for granted are not the same experience for others, especially if they look different. And I've just gotten some interesting feedback which I may mention later on, about why for some people working from home is easier, and for some people they would rather be in the office, and how that pertains to their ethnic backgrounds. But we'll get to that later if I get a chance. Joy, can you comment a little bit about how do you think about your emotions and what's going to be safe for your people?
I totally agree with what you just said. It is about safety. And so how you approach someone, how you speak to them, you can completely disagree with someone, but if you speak to them with respect, when you show somebody respect and you let them know that you are actually hearing them, hear what they have to say, you're open to what they have to say, people feel that they relax. They do that defensiveness that we have as an automatic response of protection. And so when you can show someone respect, and one little tiny thing can be like, there's something I'd like to say. Is that all right with you? It's that kind of asking permission. Can I tell you the truth? That on some way or another, that actually shows them that I am not here to just power over you or, put my opinions on you, and you have to agree with me or not agree with me. So
what if they are your superior? What if the lack of safety comes from
and that's
above?
a big one. With the people, I often work with people who are in that lower level leadership roles. They're managers or senior managers, but they're not the big honcho. And it's, how do you manage up? And it's really the same thing, because in the end, we're all human beings. And so when you can say, there's something I'd really like to talk about, there's some issues that I'm having or some challenge I'm having, can we have an honest conversation? And it starts basically, I don't think it's all that different when you manage up, as long as you slow down and learn how to manage your own energy so that you're not coming across as overly aggressive or a mouse either. Because I think leaders respect people who have a sense of confidence in themselves.
Yeah. Jacqueline, comments about that, including managing up?
I think it comes down to communication. I mean, that's really what Joy's speaking to. It's how do we communicate what, we'd like to share? How do we not only bring out, this is us working together kind of thing, as opposed to, let's take feedback, for instance. We know that many times people start with a negative before they go to the positive, and what would happen if you were to start with, this is what's working, and here's some of the stuff that isn't, that could be done better, So the framing of it and the conversation around it is really the issue. And for a lot of people, they don't know how to listen, number one. And number two is the phraseology that people get to use. And this is something I do regularly with my middle level managers, is teaching them the phraseology that actually gets them better results.
Mhm.
So, one of the favorite words, of course, or phrases is help me understand, because that one definitely elicits, okay, so we're in a conversation as opposed to we are in the sharing of information. And that whilst that is exactly what's happening, you mentioned earlier that the building of empathy becomes a big piece here. So the shared stories of the experience is what builds the bonds of trust. And that's another big piece in the psychological safety piece, is trust. Do I trust you to do what's right? Do I trust you to handle whatever it is that I have to give you? And that brings up the fear piece right there.
Right.
The fear piece is tied into our limited beliefs. It's tied into the behaviors that we allow to run our lives. And it's also tied into a very strategic thing of, am I good enough? And when we get involved in that conversation, especially with seniors, if you go in like, Uriah Heep with your cap in hand, but being ever so humble,
Uriah Heep, from our international, was a sort of a sucking up person, a character from Charles Dickens.
Right, yes. Right. And I always think of that when someone is over humble, a little too much humility in it. We need a certain amount of assertiveness to have the conversation in the first place. But there's an edge there, and Joy would probably talk to that better than me, where the assertiveness has to be tempered with, we're in this conversation together for a reason, and it's to make things better.
Well, let's actually talk about this for a minute. This also brings up one of the things that I talk about all the time, which is how women can get men to listen. Actually, it's how multi-focused people can get single-focused people to listen. So if you are a multi-focused thinker and you're the kind of person who sees all sorts of connections and things, but the person you need to speak with is single-focused, make an appointment so that you're not interrupting, so that you have their full attention, because if they're single-focused, they only have one thing in their head at a time. And then be concise and respectful about that. And that's another piece that just practically then do it, and then practice if you need to. If you're scared, have a friend, or your coach. You could call any one of us and practice saying what you need to say. Sometimes only muscle memory gets me through that kind of conversation.
That's a very important point. I just had a client who had to go to her boss. It's a small company. She works directly with the CEO. It's the first time somebody else has been working with him. And she was very unhappy, and she had to talk to him. So we looked at the protocol of how to have the conversation and did a role play and practiced that. And she went in and talked to him and had fantastic results from it.
Yeah.
Because of the way she approached, which is not about blaming or you made me feel this or you do this. It's when this happens, I have this experience. So you're never putting it onto the other person that they're making you feel anything, because ultimately they don't. You're feeling what you're feeling.
Yes.
It comes from you and your own thoughts and what's going on inside.
That's a very important piece right there, because I've also had clients the same way, where I role played with them on the conversation that's going to take place between them and their bosses. And it takes me back to, communication 101 in relationships is, when you do the finger pointing stuff, you'll get people being defensive right away. But when you say, when this happens, I feel, that becomes a very different kind of conversation. And I can say from my own life, if we're looking at shared stories, 42 years of marriage, we've had a lot of those conversations over the years,
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a big piece in the workplace too, that you have to be able to keep that line open and show respect, and definitely humility comes into it as well. It's not about I'm better than you. It's simply about we're here to do something that we together we want the results. How can we make it better?
One thing that both of you have said to me, and is something that I think about a lot, is awareness is everything. Being aware of how you respond. Because I have been with people who the way they survived in childhood was to attack first. Because in, plenty of families, if you don't attack first, or if you feel threatened, if you don't attack first, you will be eaten up and, spat out by the lions. Or families where the only way you survive is to disappear. It's sort of like the Cheshire cat, or to freeze. So the fight, flight, or freeze. And if you are aware of what your response is likely to be, then you can recognize it, hopefully.
Well, self-awareness is the foundation for emotional intelligence. That's the first step.
And Jacqueline, I know you were saying something about that.
Well, I was going to say, Joy's the expert on somatic body experiences, and you can feel stuff coming on. You can feel it. You can feel it in your belly. You can feel it in your sweaty palms. You can feel it in your shortness of breath, the dry mouth. There's all kinds of bodily activities going on
which is a message, right?
Which is signaling, absolutely, that you're ready to go into some kind of situation where previously you've been uncomfortable. How many people hate difficult conversations, confrontation? Yeah. I mean, I hear it all the time. Oh no, I can't go talk to them because, well. And to your point, it's about the history. If you grew up in a family where your opinions were not respected, where you were shut down constantly, it's very hard to open up. But that self-awareness piece is number one. It's certainly what my work is all about. And I know it's Joy's as well. But that is, for before anything starts, get to know yourself. Yeah.
Joy, I love your book. It's called Emotions and Owner's Manual. Can you expand on this a little bit? And then I have some very specific questions for you too, for you both.
Well, whenever I speak or I'm teaching a workshop or wherever, one of the first questions I ask is, what are emotions? And often there's this silence. And then somebody says, feelings? Yes, feelings. Well, what are feelings? My premise is that we actually need to be educated about what emotions are, how they function, and to stop all of the judgment and labeling. A lot of the issues around emotions is because we have so much judgment against emotions. And so I say there's no negative emotions. There's only the repression, suppression, or being overwhelmed and led by your emotions, which creates a negative results. Emotions are a biological information system. So they're bringing you information, and each primary emotion is bringing you a specific signature piece of information, like sadness is about loss. Fear is about protection. And so when you can be viscerally aware of, as Jacqueline was saying, this in your body, to feel that and understand, this particular sensation, my recent client, she thought she was just angry, and she realized there was fear. There was a lot of fear, and fear can be very subtle. It can be under the carpet, right? It can be there without us being conscious of it. So the owner's manual is to really understand what are these primary emotions and how they function in the body and how they influence our behavior and what we can do to clean up our system in a way and become more emotionally fluid.
I would like to ask you, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is when we did our preliminary conversations about this, I have a dear friend, young friend, who is the victim of a manager, small company. The manager was promoted into something that she couldn't handle. And so she took it out on him. Everything became his fault. If you find yourself with a toxic manager, so we're talking about bad behavior in the workplace. If you got someone who is being toxic, blaming everybody else, micromanaging, all of that, instead of quitting, which is what so many people are doing these days, how can that be addressed, changed, helped? I mean, you can't really tell somebody you're a terrible manager, but what can we do? Help. I have a young friend who needs this, who's listening to this. So help.
Well, I would start by, I mean, the person who's giving out that particular set of affairs with blame and, bullying and so forth and micromanaging, that's a very insecure person, number one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's being projected out onto someone else.
Yes.
Now, on the receiving end of that, how do we want to handle it? Again, if we go back to the conversation, it's like, how's this working for you kind of thing, and sometimes it's very hard to break through those barriers that person has created, because a lot of their behavior is very defensive. Mm-hmm. It's defensive, but it comes out as, I'm going to inflict it on you.
Yes.
So when you start to address that about how can we do that differently, you're more than likely to be met with a defensive response, mm-hmm. which makes you feel like you're getting nowhere fast. Mm-hmm. So the idea for that would be either I need to be transferred out of that department, or, I need to be gone. But I think it's a very tricky situation, and Joy's the expert on the emotions. So I would say she's probably got a little bit more insight maybe than I do at this moment, but I definitely feel that sometimes you're banging up against a brick wall and going nowhere fast.
Well, so Joy, just quickly say, the thing is that if you leave, doesn't solve their problem, which is not necessarily your job, but it just means that the next person is going to be dealing with it.
I agree. But even if you kick it upstairs and you want to talk to somebody who's more senior than the person who's behaving badly, they may not be willing to do anything about it because that person is valuable to the organization. And so they put up with it. I hear these stories over and over again.
That happens. Absolutely.
Joy,
that
please.
Happens.
Okay. So what can my friend do?
I do have an example. So I had a client who was transferred to San Francisco office. Her boss was exactly what you're describing. She'd never been treated that way in her life. She was having panic attacks because of the way she's being treated. And so the first thing is to learn how to create space for yourself. So I tell people with energetic boundaries, mm-hmm. which is a whole long topic we could go into, but later, that to create space for yourself so that you can, first of all, be aware and be in dominion of your own emotions. So that trigger, that fear that comes up or the anger that comes up is your responsibility to not to control it, but to be in dominion so that you're present with it, you run the energy, you understand it. And then I do teach how to be working with the energetic boundaries. So she started with that. And then she told her boss that she wanted to have a conversation with her and invited her to lunch. So they were not in the office, but in a neutral territory. And so when the boss said, well, so what do you want to talk to me about? She explained very calmly in that languaging that I feel like you really dislike me. You seem to be critical of everything I do, and I don't understand it. I've never experienced this before. And conversation pursued, and it turns out her boss was under a huge amount of pressure from her boss. I mean, the whole company was pretty toxic. Mm-hmm. And in the end, that boss, that woman, became the mentor of my client. And I helped my client get a job in a different company. So she did ultimately leave, but she had the experience in being able to manage that relationship that got a result that was much greater than just quitting.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking this makes me think kind of on a global scale. Let's fix the world, the three of us, okay? This is such a common situation. I have another client who has just taken a new job because of the people. She had offers from 3 different companies, and she said the company that treated its people best was where she goes. So this is what is happening to companies, but it's awfully slow. Is there any way, if say the board say the board realizes that they're losing all their good people and the problem really starts at the top, how could a board member put something into place to maybe turn things around?
Well, I have a story on that one where, I do behavioral assessments where we measure the specific behaviors that are getting in the way of people's career and success. And I was called in to do an executive team. And when I did all the individual debriefs, and we eventually did a team meeting. And what I saw in the team meeting, and this was, all C-suite individuals, the man who was the CEO was clearly not invested in running the company with what I called the we attitude. It was all about us. For him, it was all about me. And there was one member of that team who had been brought on to turn the company around. And he very clearly during this conversation said, if you guys don't manage to figure this part out and learn how to communicate more effectively and really understand how to work with people, then I'm out and you can basically all go screw yourself. Well, that wasn't an option. So what happened was 3 weeks later, the CEO, the president, and the senior HR person was gone because they were not willing to figure out how to make this team work effective. And the one said, I will leave if you guys don't manage to, and it was very floral in his language, by the way. That was his bottom line was, you guys need to go if you want this company to run effectively. Now, to your point about a board member who's willing to speak up, again, there's a fear issue there. I lose my position, I lose my respect, blah, blah, blah. But again, it's like if this is what you believe in and you believe it's important, and to your point that you made earlier too, there are far more toxic workplaces than there are great places to work.
Yes.
And I think people they tolerate the toxic communications, the respect, the lack of trust. And that's the big piece that I certainly know all three of us, if we want to change the world, we are invested in helping individuals, number one, to understand that's how it, that we need to do something.
This is where we're going as a corporate, as a business system.
Yeah.
In the West, we are all speaking from West Coast America, so it's may take a while. And I am aware how much the three of us, we've known each other for several years, we three, and what our backgrounds are affecting us. Let me ask, if you find yourself in a toxic position, and maybe you don't really want to be 6 months out of work right away, or you can't afford to be, what's the first thing to do?
What comes to mind first is the term healthy detachment. So it's not about being indifferent or being passive or shutting down, but it's about recognizing that you're in the situation for now. Something needs to change, and it will change, and that you don't have to be in a state of constant stress, of constant tension in the meantime, that you can come into yourself. And one little exercise I have people do is to go get that place that's in the center of the brain, like a line that goes through here and a line that goes through here, and where they meet in the center of your brain, to look from that point of view. It's like a stepping back and becoming an observer of the situation. And when you step back and you're also aware of your own emotions, and sometimes you have to find a way to vent a little at times, whether that's writing it out or talking to a friend, but it's to step back and to be an observer. You have so much more available to you in terms of your options, of the choices that you can make in the moment. And then how are you going to get out of that situation? Where are you going to go? So it really is being able to recognize that you are in charge of your own destiny. You are in charge of your choices. And sometimes you have to slow things down, take a breath, be patient, and then look at what your options are so that you can make a more conscious choice. I mean, ultimately, the idea of emotional intelligence is that you make more conscious choices that are the more beneficial for you. And when they're beneficial for you in that kind of conscientious way, they're more beneficial for the people around you. You impact other people more positively.
I love that. It's actually, Jacqueline, I'll get to you in 1 second, but it reminds me of the time it takes. You take a little time to detach from the emotions of the moment, breathe, calm down, meditate for 5 minutes, turn off your phone so that you're able to detach. I have a colleague who's in his mid-40s who's working in a tech company where everyone else is in their 20s. Mm-hmm. And there are crises every day. There's always just crisis. And he said his job is to sort of take his coffee cup in hand and walk around and calm down. And people say, how can you be so calm? And he said, well, I have been through these before, and I've been through this kind of crisis. We will come out the other end. And when everyone around you is panicking because it's the first time they've seen a crisis, it's really easy to get caught up in that kind of mob mentality, if you will. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jacqueline, would you have like the one way to start?
The one way to start.
What's the one thing we could leave people with? One tip.
One thing that I would leave people with is, and based on what we were just talking about, you have to practice the conversations. You have to practice the ways in which you are going to engage, because all of the things that you've all just mentioned, these are great, but we know that doesn't come automatically. And that's, of course, why we hire coaches too, because they help you to frame and they help you to really, get focused on what it is you need to do. But I would say really pay attention to the signals that are coming your way. And if you're looking at detachment, practice. Put some energy into that detachment that Joy talks about. We can only do that after we've been burned a few times, and then you'll know how to step back. Yes. So it's not an instant fix. I can't offer a one thing, go do that and you'll be fine. Mm-hmm. No, practice the conversation. Practice how you're dealing with your feelings. Practice how you can create boundaries around yourself. That becomes a really key issue in a toxic workplace. Otherwise, I'm going somewhere else.
Well, the thing is, and this is what I'm going to be talking about next week, is you might just quit and go somewhere else and find the same situation unless you have the tools.
Precisely.
The tools to recognize what's your part and to recognize what's going on. Otherwise, you just repeat it over and over again until from job to job to job until eventually, hopefully, you learn the lesson. But you've got to know what your tools are as well.
You've got to know that, and you've got to take the time for it. And that's what all our work does. It's, Joy's got that with her emotions, understand your emotions. Mine's is all about understand your thinking and your behavior. Yours is almost the same, and that's really where we operate. Joy, you had something that you wanted to add to that.
Well, no, I agree with you. And your thinking is your emotions start with your thinking. You experience everything from inside of yourself. Mm-hmm. So that's why self-awareness and turning to yourself and then practicing so that you build, we'll practice a physical skill, a dance move, or, how to play tennis. We'll practice and practice to get better, but we don't practice the thing that is most essential for our well-being, for our happiness, for our health and our success in life, which is how we are who we are and how we think and how that impacts our feelings and the choices that we make. It's all interrelated. So I totally agree with you, Jacqueline. It's great. It's so interesting. I love being with other women who are on the same plane. We approach it a little bit differently, but that fundamental truth is the foundation of what we're all doing.
So,
and it does help to have a coach.
It really helps to have a coach. So I have plenty of people. I pay a lot of money to my coaches to help me see where I'm caught in my emotions and where I'm not paying attention. So thank you, Joie Seldon, Jacqueline Wales. Thank you so much for being my guests today. This was really fun, really informative. And we will be posting links to how to reach these people in the comments here. This has been the weekly broadcast of Strategic Speaking for Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.